Hello and welcome to the Be Glad movement. My name's Pollyanna and I'm on a mission to bring you as many stories as possible of good coming out of bad and reasons to be glad. And today I'm joined by a very special guest. It's Kirsty Dillon's mum. Kirsty shared in a previous video, which you might have seen, and now her mum has very kindly said that she'd like to share too. And put my tongue back in. Her name is Val. So say hello, Val. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for asking me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a privilege to have you on. I'm going to get out of the way and let you tell your story.
Oh, where do you begin? I think Kirsty probably mentioned that, excuse me, her dad was died in an accident at sea. Now, she was barely 5. I have 3 daughters. Her older sister was about 8, and her younger was just newly 4. It happened, like accidents do. It just changes your life in a moment. It happened in Canada, so we didn't, see or have any connection with the actual accident. Anyway, his body, it was at sea, and his body wasn't found for about 10 months.
Wow.
Anyway, the children, he was in the Navy, and at that time he had been in the Royal Navy, but at that time he was in the Merchant Navy. He'd left the Royal Navy, retired from the Royal Navy, and joined the Merchant Navy. So he was away a lot. Right. And I was in full-time work. I was a radiographer at the time, and so we had very busy lives, and the children were at school. Although Shona, my youngest, was still at nursery. She was barely 4.
Right.
When it happened, you almost go into automatic pilot in a way, because the first thing you think about, you're devastated, but the first thing you think about is the children and how you tell them and how you cope with them. A great friend came round, and he was a great friend of my husband's, and he told my eldest daughter, who was very sporty. She was a great swimmer. She reached national level in swimming, and this was due to her father's encouragement too. And the other 2 were really quite small. Anyway, I obviously had to have time off work, but very few. It was a couple of weeks only. At that time, compassionate leave in NHS, I suppose in any big establishment, wasn't very great. But I sort of made them continue their normal lives to go to school, and I had to sort out my life, whether I stayed in the house we had, which was quite a big house, or did I move, or what else. My extended family suggested, I'm Scottish, as you can probably hear, it's imprinted in my voice forever. Some people said, why don't you go back to Scotland? But relatives disperse, and I didn't really have anyone close there. So I continued to live in Southsea, and then and I continued my job. The life continued, as normally as we could. Because I had we had spare rooms in the house to help meet the financial burden that occurred, we took in students. Well, I took in students, and they looked after themselves, but they were all young men. So the girls grew up with brothers then. They didn't have brothers, but these guys, I had 3 at the time, and they were wonderful boys. They really were, but the house was chaos, you can imagine. I was in full-time work, 3 little children, 3 young men studying. They all were engineers, but they were amazing. And the house was just chaotic, but a very happy house. Life got so busy, as it would, of course, because I had to work and they had to go to school, and money was tight. But I managed to make ends meet. The thing I regret now is that, well, I regret so many things. I think there wasn't enough attention made to their mental health well-being because of what had happened. The school, excuse me, were told, and they knew, but Joe and Kirsty's dads died, so that's it. They were okay, but they couldn't. It wasn't PC, shall we say, then. This was in the 80s, to deal with, shall we say, a PTSD situation, because they went to school with children who had daddies and they didn't have a daddy. In fact, I remember Kirsty saying to me one day, "Oh, so-and-so in my class has got 3 daddies." And I said, 3 daddies? And she said, "Yes, I don't have one at all, but she's got 3. She's got one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, and one on a Saturday." And I thought, oh yeah. She said, "But they've all got different names." And I said, "Oh, well, I just shoved it off and said, oh, that's just an unusual situation." "Oh, well, she likes them all." Anyway, Shona was a very quiet little girl, and had been since she was tiny, and very, she didn't express herself for many years. Now she's a full-blown great woman, as all of my 3 are. But I think having no father around, because she was born at a time when he was away anyway a lot, she didn't really have a relationship with him, as Kirsty didn't really much either, although more than Shona did, because Shona was a little girl.
Sure.
Then years rolled on. I obviously, I think you miss when you're widowed, and you're widowed quite young, you miss so many things about having a partner, having a husband, not only to co-parent, and I was used to parenting myself quite a bit, but the fun angle, the trips out, also, and the worries about finances and things like that.
Sure.
He was a highly intelligent, very well-read man, and also great fun. But he had suffered from depression for some years before he died, and he'd had a few months really of severe mental health illness, really, and he spent some time in a psychiatric unit to help him, and it was severe depression. He would he'd go up to his bedroom, and he'd just read all night. He wouldn't communicate with anybody, and he wouldn't see anybody. Right. Apart from the children would just barge in and speak to him. But he was getting much better before he died. And the psychiatric report from that time was that he was suffering from reactive depression. He was divorced, and he'd been brought up, although he rejected the faith, he was born a Catholic, and he'd had a failed marriage, and that was a great burden of guilt on him. But which, I mean, in this day and age, it's nonsense, isn't it? But he did have this burden of guilt that he'd failed at something. And he had two daughters from that marriage, whom obviously he adored, but he didn't see. But it was a very, very turbulent marriage, from what I gather. Anyway, I don't know, maybe Joe remembers his depressions. She was the older one, but the other two probably don't. But they know by us talking about it at times. So about, maybe 10 years later, and we lived quite happily with these boys in the house, and it was a very happy household, very busy household. You know, they were young men, young students, and the girls sort of adored them in many ways. None of my girls were any good at mathematics at school, and of course they came to the age that they were doing maths exams, and they always went to the boys. And one of them, to this day, who still keeps in touch with us all, he said, it's me that got them through their lower maths and GCS maths. And he probably did. One of them got through. Two of them got through. Anyway, I digress. About 10 years later, just out of the blue, I met Jeff, my present husband. It was just, you know, I was at a pub with some friends who and he was there with some other people and he knew the group, and about a couple of weeks later I got this phone call asking me out to supper. And I thought, oh my God, I haven't had a date since I was about 16 or something like that. How do you behave? What do you do? And I remember when he first asked me out, I took an extra half hour on my lunch and rushed down to the shops to buy a new blouse or something. Anyway, our relationship, he was divorced, and he was a very sort of private man who didn't show his emotions and was very closed in and tight, but he was a nice, kind person. Anyway, the girls I didn't tell them at first I was being taken out. And then I thought, this is ridiculous. After about a couple of months, I told them, and I brought them home to meet them. And Kirsty, she arranged a meeting and said, and I wasn't invited to the meeting. And the three of them had this meeting, said, you don't need to take our mum out because we've got pocket money. We can buy her supper out. And Kirsty didn't, and Shona and Joe, you know, were more acceptant of him. And then Kirsty, she didn't speak to him for about a year.
Right.
But that was, you know, reaction really, and that was grief in a way. And now I feel dreadful because they weren't looked after mentally because of what happened to them. Anyway, eventually, after some years, Jeff and I got married, and we bought a house together. This house we're living in, and he adores these girls. They are like he has a daughter and a son, but he treats them like his own children. He's a very kind, loving person who they obviously now they think the world of him. So from these dark periods of losing a dad, and they didn't grow up with a dad. They met Jeff when they were teenagers, which was difficult for them. You know, teenage life's difficult anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
But And then I was a radiographer right through, and Jeff worked, he worked for IBM, and he was sent to Europe. And eventually he suggested, look, why don't you give up radiography, and we can afford somehow or other to make this work. And so I did, and I commuted back and forwards we lived in Vienna, and the girls were doing A-levels and university, and we commuted back and forwards. Eventually I decided I wasn't using my brain, so I went back to university and I did a degree in world religions. Right. And so I did it part-time, so I took over 4 years I did it. And then I trained as a Unitarian preacher. So now I use my degree a lot, and I do masses of funerals, you can imagine. And
sorry to interrupt you. For anyone that doesn't know what a Unitarian...
Yeah, Unitarians are belief that it's quite complicated, but the crux of the matter is that we accept anyone's belief. Right. If someone says to me, I'm a Christian, I'm a devout Christian, we respect that. If they're a Hindu, a Jew, a Muslim, or an atheist, we respect that. We feel that religion or belief is personal, and no one should interrupt or say to them, you can't believe that, or you can't have this, especially in the services I do. A lot of them are humanist, and some of the family object to that. But if the deceased's a humanist, you must respect that.
Sure.
And so and the Unitarians they find the Trinity in Christianity difficult to accept. But that's going into the nitty-gritty of it. So it's a very liberal belief. And most of the people I meet are semi-religious, non-religious. I've got 3 funerals on Monday, and there's not one of them religious. Right. All of them have said, the deceased didn't believe anything. So, and it brings me in contact with all sorts of people, highly intelligent, very successful people who have died, or the other end of society where they've had difficult lives. I've got one at the moment which it's tragic, really. The family have great difficulties, and financially and in all sorts of ways, and my heart bleeds for them, because in a way our society is fractured, I feel, in so many ways. But going back to my story, the blessings I had were, if I'd been widowed and hadn't had these girls, I don't think I could have, coped as well. All 3 are very successful women. All 3 are educated women. All 3 have gone to university. And they make me proud. But I, like any mother, you're a mum, aren't you? Yeah. And you might come to my age and you think, I failed there. But none of us are perfect.
No.
And I keep telling myself, and in your project, and I think one of the messages that should be said very strongly is that none of us are perfect, but we should learn to forgive ourselves for any misdemeanor, for any even little thing that troubles you from years ago. And I have them in my head. And you think, we must forgive ourselves, move on, and with that experience of having the guilt, you you try to love and be kind. Is it? I told you about a book, The Last 99 Words.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And there's a 99 words written in there by Fergal Keane. You know, he's the interviewer. He's a journalist, isn't he? And he's on BBC a lot. And that paragraph, I use it a lot in services because it talks about the most important thing today and in belief is to be kind.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama, it's his saying, be kind. If someone says, what do you believe to the Dalai Lama, he says, I believe in kindness.
Wow.
So I must forgive myself and try to be even more kind.
Sure. I'm sure you did your best, though. You were left in a pretty...
Well, but did I? You always question yourself. And we can't go back.
No.
You know, we can't go back. And many of the people you meet may say, oh, I did this, I did that. And they carry this burden. Now, I carry the burden, but I realize you can't do anything about it. You know, I should have thought at the time when their dad died that we gently looked after their mental health, whereas I just charged into the busy life, you know, and really, in a way, neglected that. We did lots of things together. We had great fun, and the house was blessed with, you know, laughter and fun, and these boys that lived with us. And then they've now got a stepfather who adores them in adulthood. You know, he's so important that when Kirsty phones here, she'll say, oh, it's you. Can I speak to Jeff?
That's brilliant when you consider that she didn't speak to him for a year.
Yeah, for a year, but it's usually there's something wrong with the car, or he's an engineer, you see, or she needs a radiator moved, or which is wonderful. And, and Shona does the same, and Joe the same. They all, you know, so out of that dark period comes lots of blessings. So I think that you're be glad, you know, lots of people go through dark periods of their life, but I'm in my late 70s, and you think, you know, life it hasn't been that bad. And somehow people who go through difficult times, somehow I think it gives them strength to do other things. Maybe it's being a woman, because women tend to, I find in my job, women can tackle things, not just practically, but emotionally, more than a lot of men can. Maybe it's being British. We don't bring our men up to be emotionally expressive enough. Little boys should be able to, you know, express themselves just as little girls do.
Sure, yeah. My son's 2 now, and it's one of those things that I really want him to feel comfortable expressing.
Yes, you're so right. You're so right. What's his name?
Benjamin.
Oh, that's a lovely name. A very old Jewish name, isn't it?
Apparently
yes,
so, yeah.
It's a lovely name, though. Yes. So,
I'm interested, Val, you mentioned earlier about your first husband being a Catholic and that he'd been divorced, and that weighed heavily on his mind because obviously it's frowned upon within that religion.
It was then, not now.
Not so much, no, not now. No. But and before you became, what was it that made you decide to study religion in particular?
I think it was pure accident, really. I was walking down a street in Portsmouth, and there was this notice on a wall that it was a church. I was parting a tiny little church, and the notice said, all are welcome. for those with faith or none. And I thought, that's odd. Anyway, so I went to a service there, and it was so interesting. And then I went again, and then Jeff, I made him come too, and he found it, because the subjects that are discussed or talked about are ordinary. Some of them have religion in them, but it depends who the preacher is. But you know, for instance, I've just done one recently, a service about loneliness.
Okay.
And another service I did about we all make mistakes, or another one about kindness, and I try to use examples of incidents I see in my other work. You know, you can see when you meet people who are arranging a funeral, you see the best and the worst of people. You know, families are so fractured and don't speak to each other. Even in the service, they will sit at the other end of the chapel, and they might have and there are others who are, it doesn't matter what section of society they come from, they are so overwhelmingly generous and kind. But society has lots of problems now, really, and we live in a world that's so fast. The pace is enormous, and I don't think we spend enough time reflecting on our lives and what we have. There are so many acquisitive people that I meet. You must see them too. You know, I've got to have a new bathroom. Why do you have a new bathroom? You had one 5 years ago, and I meet this a lot. You know, materialism, I think, can be so damaging. And yet, I respect that's what they want, but it makes them happy for 10 minutes, and then they want a new sofa or something, instead of reflecting on what they have around them. You know, I lost a husband, and we lived in a chaotic house, but we had the 3 girls, and I had each other and these boys who were amazing. You know, it's life turns out. For me, it did anyway, not for everyone. So, and I meet this as well. So I'm sure you've interviewed people that have had tragic things happen to them.
Yeah.
But they try to come through.
Definitely.
And, yeah.
They do.
Anyway, I hope that's not too boring.
No, it's very interesting actually. I've enjoyed listening to your story, so thank you so much for
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, don't worry.
I belong to a U3A, the University of the Third Age. Have you heard of it?
Only through knowing you.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm a great advocate of it. The over 60s can join. Well, you can be under 60s, but as long as you're just in part-time work, but it's usually over 60s. And in the group I'm with, there's 250 members, and they all give expertise of something they're interested in. I go to the creative writing and the poetry group. My husband goes to photography. He runs the wine appreciation group. And we all meet in each other's houses for that band of society, that age group. It's wonderful. There's a group in our U3A that, what's it called? How to use your bus pass. So a lot of these people who have bus passes and don't drive, they meet at the bus station once a fortnight, once a month, and the leader has planned where they will go, and they stop at a pub for lunch, and they've had a day out. So this solves a lot of loneliness in old age, because there are so many lonely people. It's a scourge of society. really, because the rest of society is so busy that I meet elderly men or elderly ladies in my job that don't have anybody to visit them.
Right.
Or so U3A, there's a local history group, so they go and discuss bits of local history. It's fascinating. So that it's inspired me, although I'm elderly, to write a lot more. We write something for our group every month. And I've got a book in my head, but haven't we all?
Yeah.
I'm sure you have too.
Mhm.
Kirsty's just written a play, which I'm very proud of her.
Yeah.
Which is going to be performed.
Exciting.
But my book is still in my head. A bit of it's on my laptop, but anyway. So I hope I haven't bored you.
No, you haven't at all. You haven't at all. And I particularly like your overriding message, really, which is to be kind to each other and respect each other.
It's you can just. I say to the congregations, I do this kind service. The first thing I say is, "Have you been kind to anybody today?" And they all look at me shocked, and I, have you sort of held somebody's hand to cross the road, or have you helped an old lady lift her shopping, or have you said, "Isn't it a nice day?" Speak to somebody.
Yeah.
Or anything, the tiniest thing. You must read that book, The Last 99 Words. It's just wonderful.
I will.
And I use it a lot.
I'll definitely look that one up. Definitely. Yeah. Oh, Val, thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure. I hope your project becomes a big success. I'm sure it will.
Oh,
but Kirsty will tell me how you're doing, won't she?
I'm sure she'll keep you posted. Yeah.
Oh, she will. She's never short of something to say.
If you like this video, please do hit the like and subscribe button and you'll get notifications when new videos are uploaded. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram if you search @BeGladMovement, and please do get in touch if you've got a story you'd like to share. It doesn't matter if it's something similar to what somebody else has already shared, because I really do believe your story in your voice has the ability to reach someone in their time of need. So please do get in touch, and I look forward to seeing you in another episode. Many thanks.